Waniska, bon dia, good morning to everybody. I'm Emilee. Happy Thursday, wherever you might be. I'm so happy to be here today with Elaine Alec, who I've never met. I'm meeting now for the first time, but I've heard good things about, and I've had the opportunity to creep you a little bit and see some of your videos and get really excited for today. So, Elaine, could you please introduce yourself for our community here?
White Halt in Chai Squeeze Teeth Kanit, Kinokanakin Siquapum. My name is Teeth Kanit. It means standing by water. It was given to me on the day I was born by my tama, Elaine Alec. My English name is Elaine Alec, and I am from the Okanagan and Shuswap Nations. I'm currently in Kamloops, British Columbia, but am originally from the Penticton Indian Band from the southern interior of BC. So we're about an hour and a half from the Washington state border.
Mm. Thank you so much for being here today. I know you've been pretty busy, it seems like. What have these last few weeks been like? I saw a video on your Facebook that you just got a box. Like, I'm sure there's a long story here. So let's just kind of settle in, take a deep breath. And can you tell me a little bit about this book and how long it took for you to write it? And then, we'll just really dig in.
So I've really been serious about writing the book for the last 10 years. And I just wrote it. I started getting serious about it December 1st, 2019. And it took me 29 days to write the book. And to the first draft, it took longer to go through the editing phase, but it feels like it's been forever, but it's since December 1st. It's now July 16th, and I have the actual book in my hands now. This is like a real book.
Wow.
So yeah, it took a really long time for me to get through it, and it's been super emotional because it does talk about my life. And when I started writing it 10 years ago, it was a very different version. It was not as rigorously honest as this version is. I was in a way different place where I didn't want to acknowledge a lot of things and share a lot of things. I was very protective over certain details, and I didn't take a lot of accountability in my story 10 years ago. So it's a very different version today than what it would have been if I wrote it 10 years ago.
Wow. So that book has been along in your journey in the last 10 years and has transformed and shape-shifted along with you. What kinds of stories do you tell?
I talk about my childhood with my tama. She was a language speaker. She only spoke the language. She didn't speak English. And I talk about spending time with her, and I talk about my childhood with my mom. She was a practicing alcoholic until I was 10. So I talk about my experiences growing up with an alcoholic mother, but also growing up with my tama, growing up with racism and the bullying and within my own community. And I started smoking when I was 10, and I started drinking when I was 12, and I started hitchhiking all over BC when I was 12 years old. So I share a lot about that, and then it continues on through my becoming a teen mom and developing rheumatoid arthritis and becoming suicidal, and then deciding to get healthy. And it took me another 10 years, from when I decided to get healthy when I was about 23. It took me another 10 years to actually become a person that I felt was a healthier version, I guess, of myself. So it took a really long time, and I'm still moving and working through all of that. And this book has been a huge part of that healing for me as well. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect these feelings and all of the stuff that's been coming up with me that I've had to work through. I was not expecting it at all.
Wow. Can you tell me, I mean, writing a book is not an easy thing. So first of all, congratulations. That's so exciting. I can't imagine what that would feel like to get that box and everything that it took to get there. But what is your writing process like? Did you write in moments that were really emotionally charged? Did you set a time aside for yourself in the middle of the night? Do you, you know, what is your writing process? How did you channel that your own story to be written?
I only knew how to write when I was very emotional. I used to wish that I knew how to channel that and be a disciplined writer. My
Yeah.
entire life, I could only write when I was angry, mad, sad, upset. And then my fingers would just fly and it would just all come out. And so when I started to write my book or when I wanted to blog, I couldn't just sit down and do it. And I was trying to figure out, how do I do this? And people would say, just free fall write, just write that, just write. And I didn't understand that. And so I actually watched a YouTube video on how to write a book. It was a
Yeah.
free video on how to write a book. And I took a lot of those tips and I wrote an outline and I wrote messages to myself on flip chart papers and I put them up all on the walls. And I told my husband, I need to write this book by January 2020. This is the moment. My Decembers are fairly slow. I'm not traveling as much, so I'm going to use my December to write this book. I know I can do it. And so I would wake up at 5:30 in the morning and I would write for 2 to 3 hours before my son woke up and before my daughter woke up to go to school. And then I would take an hour or two throughout the day. And then I would, after my son went to sleep, I would write for another hour and a half to 2 hours in the evening. And so I was writing anywhere from 3 to 7 or 8 hours a day for 29 days and
Wow.
just got it out. And I broke up my book into themes on what I wanted to cover through the book. And I just added to whatever themes there were based on how I was feeling that day or from a conversation I had with my husband. You know, I would reflect with him or tell him a story. And then as soon as I was in that space, I knew that that was what I was going to write about in my book.
Mm. Would you call that space where you felt like you actually had that time for that to come up? Would you, because I've seen you talk about safe spaces. Is it important to have a safe space in order to be able to tap into your creative energy or also just to let your spirit speak through?
Mm-hmm. I think so. I mean, I have a huge story with my husband, and I mention it in my book, and I talk about him a lot. But he has definitely been that safe space for me. And we've only been together for 5 years. We've been married for 3. But he has been that person that I can talk to about anything, and he doesn't judge me.
Mm.
He doesn't try to fix me. He doesn't try to give me answers. He just sits silently and provides the space for me to share. Sometimes he'll ask questions, or he'll, want me to expand on something, but not often. Often it's just there to listen. And a lot of that comes out like I've found this person that I can just be myself with and talk about anything, even if I sound crazy. There's times where I'm like, do I really want to say this out loud? Do I really want people to know this is what
Right.
my thought process is?
Mm.
But that's definitely been it. And he's been a person in my life that is the first person in my life that I felt uh, has helped take care of me in so many different ways where I've always been the caretaker and I've always felt responsibility and I've always felt kind of put upon. And often it wasn't because the other person did that to me. It was because of my own things I had to deal with from being the child of an alcoholic. So I automatically put myself in those positions. And so with my husband, I've been able to just let go and just be and know that I can trust him. I trust him. That's the biggest thing. I trust him that things
Right.
aren't going to fall apart if I'm locked away in a room for 30 days.
Right.
That my children are going to be taken care of and they're going to be loved and they're going to be nurtured. And if
Mm.
I'm going to come out of the room bawling my eyes out because I've gone through a wall that I didn't know I needed to go through, that he would just be able to hold me, you know, in those moments. And so I definitely don't think I would have been able to do that without that kind of support in my life, because it was the first 100 pages were the one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life.
Wow. Well, what's his name?
Ryan Day.
Ryan Day. Well, we thank you, Ryan Day, for being such a strong support and helping you bring life to this book. Do you mind? It's right there in front of you. Do you mind reading a paragraph, reading something that either speaks to you today?
Oh my
Feel free, you
gosh.
can open it to a part where you know, whatever feels right, but we would love to hear your own words.
Oh my gosh. Was not expecting that.
If you're comfortable, if you're comfortable.
um, okay, well, since I started talking about Ryan,
Gonna put you on the screen here.
okay. Being around Ryan, even just in friendship, meant that having a relationship with him would mean complete accountability for me. There was no way I could blame him or put things on him unfairly. If I tried to spin a story for him to excuse myself for not showing up with 100% of myself, he would give me this amused look that always signaled to me that he was already going into his head to figure out if what I was saying was authentic. It took months of spending time together, of questioning myself, of opening up a little, and of working really hard on my self defeating games to allow myself enough feelings to admit that I was falling in love with him. To write that or even say it out loud was extremely difficult for me because I wanted to be hardcore and I didn't want to give anyone that kind of control over me. I thought that falling in love meant that you had to give yourself away, which meant that the other person had something over you. Falling in love meant that hurt and disappointment would follow. Allowing myself to be vulnerable was frightening and scary and messy, and I didn't always enjoy the experience of falling in love. I had to deal with so many of my old belief systems about men, love, and relationships and let them go in order to open myself up, and the process was uncomfortable.
Beautiful. I'm very emotional this week. I'm just hearing you speak and hearing it's not easy to be vulnerable.
Mhm.
It's not easy to be self-accountable or to be honest. So what did it take for you to make that decision where you said, I had a decision around 23 where I said, I want to change things in my life? Was that one specific event? Was it a number of different events? Like what brought you to that point?
Um, my mom had had a massive stroke when I was 19, just after we had established our relationship again. And after that happened, I went into a really dark place and I started drinking more heavily than I ever had in my life. And when I was and at the same time, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And when um, it got so bad that I didn't feel like I was going to live, my doctor didn't give me a lot of hope that I would be healthy. He told me I'd be in a wheelchair by the time I was 30. And so when I was about 22, 23, I attempted suicide. And when my doctor came to see me, it was funny because he was this old white guy who I fought with all the time. And he came in the next day and he looked at me and he just said, you know, Elaine, you don't have to be in pain anymore. And he said, you just have to work with me. And when he said that, I'd never felt hope in my entire life. And so that one phrase he said, that you don't have to be in pain anymore, you don't have to live in pain, I knew he was talking about my body, but he was also talking about my emotion and my emotional pain that I had hid, that I didn't want anybody to know that I had emotional pain, because I wanted to be strong and I didn't want to seem weak. And so when he said that, I grasped onto that little glimmer of hope and I started just doing things to get rid of the physical pain. And I stopped smoking and I started drinking water and I started exercising and doing yoga. And I did a lot of things to focus on my physical well being. but I couldn't get sober. It took me another 7 years before I could actually move towards that.
Have you come to the point now where you believe that that honesty, that vulnerability that you offer in the book and in your videos and in these conversations, constantly offering of yourself for others, their process as well, is that vulnerability to you a strength?
Mm-hmm. It's so there's so many things we have to work through to be ourselves. And to be yourself in this world is such a hard thing to do. And, the more that I embrace who I am and am proud of who I am and realize that everything I am is because of my tama, because of those indigenous teachings and that language and that love, and understand that our systems were based on matriarchal and egalitarian teachings, which talked about love, purpose, trust, faith, living and let live, and knowing that we're not always going to agree, we're not always going to like each other, that we're not going to do things the same, but that we shouldn't expect other people to do it the way we want them to do it. We just have to have faith that they have purpose and to put that into the world. And it's hard to show up as yourself when people are telling you to be a different way. And the more that we step out of our comfort zone, to be vulnerable, to share what's on our heart, the more that people feel confident to do the same thing. The patriarchal system tells us to be silent, tells us to have fear, tells us that doesn't belong at the table. Feelings and emotions don't belong in this space. And, the process that my people use, we start with stimat spu'us, which means what is on your heart. And that means we have to acknowledge the heart piece and the feeling piece before we can do our business. And that's how we governed and made decisions. And when people talk about indigenizing things, we try to take a system that doesn't belong to us and put pieces of us into it, and it still doesn't work. But when we can start showing up as ourselves and doing it from those types of places, that's when the difference happens. That's when the change happens, and that's when that trust starts to happen, because we have absolutely no trust in our families and our communities and our nations and with each other. And those are all fear-based. And, anytime we make decisions from fear, it never works out. And our people were never like that. And so I just feel that when, the first time I really shared, I thought I was going to have diarrhea and throw up all at the same time at a women's conference, and the women lined up afterwards to hug me. There was like 100 women in that room that came to hug me and hold me and told me how courageous I was. And I didn't feel courageous at the time, but when I realized the impact that had on the women that were there, I decided that it wasn't that it was a gift that I was given. And my mentor always told me, never sit on your gifts. And so from that moment on, I decided to keep sharing my story, because I just wish somebody had been that honest with me when I was growing up.
Yeah, I've heard you say that before, and that always just gives a pang in the stomach, the things that you wish you knew, the things that you wish that you had heard. Um, what are some of those messages that you're putting out there for people who might pick up your book? What do you hope that perhaps other young women might hear from this?
I think the biggest thing is that, you're not alone, and these things have happened to us. And to not carry the shame of it. I think silence contributes to our shame, because we don't realize, that other people have gone through the same thing. That's why I think Me Too is so powerful. The story that I heard from the woman who created the Me Too movement, I was able to hear her and meet her. And
Mm,
she said it was that this girl had shared her story with her, and at the time she wasn't prepared to share her story back. But that whole time, when she left that camp from hearing this disclosure, she said the one thing that popped up in her head was that I wish I would have said me too. I wish I would have said that that happened to me too. And just being able to say
Wow.
that to somebody, how that impacts them, what that says is that, you've been through this and you're getting through this and we can get through this. Um, and then the other piece of it is you're not crazy. you know
Yeah.
so much stuff has happened to us and so many things continue to happen to us, and people, there's so many things happening outside of us that make us feel like we're crazy, that we're alone. We think all these different things. We're unable to get out of bed, we deal with anxiety and all of that stuff. If you feel like that's just happening to you, then you don't want to share, you don't want to be open, because you don't want your boss to think that you're not capable of doing your job. You don't want others to take your children away because you don't want them to think that you're not a capable mother. And there's all these reasons why we don't share out loud with anybody, because we don't want people to think we're not capable of taking care of ourselves, when meanwhile, in the whole time I've been doing this work and sitting in circles and listening to people, we all think like that. We all have those feelings. And if we just made that normal and say, this is what happens to us and it's a part of life and we can work through it, and I'm going to support you and you're not alone, how much of a difference that would make, instead of our people and our young girls suffering in silence.
Hmm. You talked a little bit about there being points when you kind of dug into the physical health. Was that because you felt like you had more control over that? What did that look like for you in terms of that physical realm? And I'm asking you that as I'm in the middle of I have my own relationship to getting into the physical health, training the physical body as a way to kind of ease into the work on the emotional or mental plane, and then of course always connected to that spiritual journey. But what was that space like for you to get into that physical training? How did you get that kind of motivation?
I think, with everything takes practice. And one of the sayings I really like and I really believe in is, the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And
Mm,
so when I first started getting healthy, it was the one thing I knew that I could deal with. I knew that I could start learning yoga. I knew that I could go to the gym and walk on the treadmill for a bit and maybe jog. And I knew, that I could start slowly doing that to get my body moving, because my arthritis was so bad I couldn't even button up my own buttons or open a car door. And
mm,
so to just do stuff to keep my body moving, I knew that I had to continue to do that. And I had to work it into my life, and I had to be committed to staying consistent, and I had to develop discipline, and I had to, sometimes I had to wake up earlier if I knew I was going to have a busy day, or I knew that I'd have to push myself when I was tired, and I knew I had to have patience because I wasn't going to have results overnight. And so I had to learn to look at, like, here's a small goal I'm going to set for 12 weeks, and I'm not going to complain until that 12 weeks is over. And when that 12 weeks hits, that's when I can, beat myself up for not being good enough. And so I put that into my way of thinking, and I got really, really fit. And I ran a marathon in
geez.
Jamaica, and
Wow.
being able, my 30th birthday, I ran a half marathon in Jamaica. And it was my 30th birthday that the doctor said I'd be in a wheelchair.
Wow.
It was it was things like that started developing, me pushing myself out of my comfort zone. I was scared to go to the gym. I was scared to work out in front of people. I was scared of what I looked like. There were so many things I was scared of, but I continued to push myself.
Mhm.
And that's what I do with myself when I build my business, when I wrote my book, when I've, wanted to do something for myself, I set those goals, and I have to remember the discipline, it's consistency, it's patience, that, I'm not to beat myself up. And, when I look at my goals, when people ask me my goals for my book sales, or what is, people ask me about the marketing, they have all these things, but I'm looking at I'm looking at a year. I'm looking at a year. After a year, I can reflect on what I've done, and then beat myself up for what I did or didn't do. But right now, I don't. My goal is to just get it into the hands of young women, and to step out of my comfort zone and go on video, and all of those things that I don't like to do, and continue to do it every day. I wake up like, oh, yeah, I have this interview, and I
This
have to
live with this crazy girl, I don't even know. No idea what she's gonna ask.
and push through those things, like, oh man, I hope I don't mess up. I hope I don't say something stupid, or I hope, just cut. And it's practice. It's just over and over and over again. And it's the way I take that into everything I do. And it started with the physical piece of me. And that was when I was 22, and I'm 42 now. So it's, and then it took me, I didn't get sober until I was 30. And then, even after I got sober, it took me like 5 years to understand what sobriety actually was. And then being able to work through that. And so, even now I just continue to work at things and push myself out of my comfort zone, because my hope is that one day I'm just going to be able to be healed. But I don't think that ever happens. But it does get easier, and every day I can be a lot more grateful for where I am today, and thankful that I'm alive, and that I'm healthy, and that my kids, by the grace of the creator and the universe and God, or that they will never see me in that dark space, and that they will just know that they're loved and safe.
Can I ask you to read another part? We want to hear more.
Okay. Oh, crazy. I just opened it up to this though. I tried many times in my 20s to get sober. I would think of my mom, and I would do my best to quit on my own. Each time I tried, I would make it to the 1-year mark and start drinking again, every time thinking it would be different. During my early 20s, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and fibromyalgia. There were times when I couldn't get out of bed, or I would end up in the hospital. On days when I felt better, I would pop pain pills and go drinking. I started going to the clubs on my own because Rob became extremely jealous. When I started to feel suffocated, I would take off on him to drink and cheat. My disease made me feel undesirable and unwanted. When I researched rheumatoid arthritis online and saw pictures of what it looked like, I would get depressed, thinking of how I would become deformed and confined to a wheelchair, and no one would want me. I would get sloppy drunk, end up in cars and alleys with strangers, and sometimes I would end up in the back of a cop car and brought home. Twice during those days, I was mistaken for a prostitute. Once, when I was walking by myself, I got chased by a man who told me he wanted an hour. The second time was at a hotel party with a guy who wanted me to meet up with his well-off white friends. They asked him if I was an escort. Both times I was stereotyped. I was oblivious about who I surrounded myself with. My best friend at the time, Thomas, was heavily involved in the partying lifestyle, but I didn't pay attention to it because he kept me away from it. I was so self-involved that I didn't even look around to see what was happening. I had met Thomas at a fitness center that we both went to. Eventually, I started working at the fitness center, and he would visit me while I was working. When I asked Thomas what he did for work, he told me he was an art dealer. Rob had grown up with a dad who was a drug dealer and pimp, so he laughed at me when I told him this. He told me that art dealers don't drive Escalades like that or hang out with friends who get flown into parties in a helicopter. I was hanging out with people who were involved in organized crime, but I had no fear and didn't think about my well-being or safety because I didn't think I was at risk. There were times when I would be around hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars worth of drugs and money, and people who were enforcers and dealers. I sat at the table with people who were so high up they wouldn't even touch the money or drugs. Thomas and I would often sit off to the side in the club and have some deeply intense conversations. I knew he was a brilliant man. We were both living in extremely dark places and really knew nothing about each other. We told each other stories about our lives, but we never talked about how we felt about it or how it affected us. Sometimes he would start to ask me questions about why I was so guarded, and we would get into arguments when he tried to push me out of my comfort zone.
I could just listen to you all day. If you don't stop me, I would just listen to the whole. I definitely am looking forward to reading this book. Is it available online or is it only available?
Yeah, right now it's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Chapters, but the paperback is on pre-order right now. I have received messages from friends that they've received notices that their books have been shipped. So
Okay.
you can order the paperback version on Barnes and Noble and Amazon,
Mhm,
or you can ask for Chapters Indigo to order
mhm,
the book into the store. Uh,
mhm,
and the ebook version is available now. So it's on Kindle, Kobo, iBooks, Amazon, and I think Smash Books, I think.
mm.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about the title, Calling My Spirit Back? Where did that come from for you?
So it's a line in my book, and it's something that I've been told to do a lot through the work that I do because I travel so much and share myself. And it's also a line that my mom shared with me. My mom would tell me that, and other people would tell me that when you drink, the alcohol spirit is so powerful that it takes over your body and your spirit leaves, and your spirit leaves you for 4 days. And so during my really hard dark times, I didn't have my spirit at all because I was drinking so much. And it took me a long time to call my spirit back, and to begin to feel. Um, and so those were all parts of my book, and talking about, when our people start to call our spirits back, that's when the sickness and disease will leave our communities. And I had originally called this book Cultivating Safe Spaces. And my editor from Calwell said, this is your book. You can do whatever you want, but I feel like Cultivating Safe Spaces is too textbooky. And I said, I don't mind, because I originally wrote this book for planners and students to learn how to cultivate safe spaces. And that was the whole intention of the book. And he said, no, I think this book deserves a broader audience than that. And if you have a different title, you might get more interest from the general population. And so he said, what about a line from your book? And he said, I like Calling My Spirit Back. And so I sat with it for a while, and then I did a survey on Facebook, and I said, if you didn't know me, and if you were looking in the bookstore, which one of 6 titles would you choose? And a majority, like 95% of the people, said they liked Calling My Spirit Back. And so that's how I came up with that title, and was totally okay with it.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And I do think it speaks to a lot of different cultures as well. That idea of calling your spirit, letting your spirit speak, attending to your spirit. Um, can you tell me about the artwork? I mean, I ask this because I am a sister. My worldview is one of sisterhood. I have one sister. She's a couple years older. So whenever I hear that someone has a sister, you actually said, I creep, I'm a journalist. You said, my sister knows how to take what's inside of me and make it into this, which is the artwork. Can you explain
Yeah.
about what that process is like?
So my sister, Evelyn White, she has been an artist since she was a kid. And she actually tells a story that when we found out we had to move out of our house that we had grown up in, I told her to color on the walls so that nobody would want to buy our house. And so
Wow, why didn't I think of that?
she colored on the walls and our house sold. So that was, she decided at that moment she was going to be an artist. And But I can't draw at all. My whole family are artists. Like everybody carves and draws and they're just amazing. But I don't, I'm a writer. That's my art. But my sister, I can tell her something or I can say I want something or how I'm, and she'll say, well, how do you want it to feel? Like, what is the feeling you want people to have? Or, what is the emotion? And she'll ask me questions. And then that's how she decides she's going to do it. And then I always feel like it's Christmas when she sends me the email. She'll say, I sent you the email, take a look. And I always feel like it's Christmas when I open it up because it's always gorgeous. But the image on the cover is the Bitterroot, and it's spitlum, and it's one of our traditional foods in the interior. And when I was little, we used to go out to Roddy Flats in Penticton with my tama and my mom, and we would dig Bitterroot. And there's a heart in it that we were told we have to take the heart out and put it back into the ground. And we were taught about putting things back and why it was important. And as little kids, that's what we were told. And then sometimes we would my tama would sit on a blanket or a chair and she would peel the dirt off the root. And I would sit there and my tama would tell me stories about, whatever it was that we were doing that day. And so those were some of my favorite memories. But Bitterroot represents a perspective type in our communities. We have 4 perspectives: the action, the innovation, the relationship, and the tradition. And Bitterroot represents the relationship perspective. And, when I was younger, relationship perspective cares about people. They don't want to leave people behind. They are patient and they are loving and they provide space for people. They connect things and they understand that everything has a relationship with each other. And it takes relationship people are very vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And I was never vulnerable for most of my life. And so I hid behind an action perspective. And so for me, it was so important. Like Bitterroot represents so many things to me, but I totally embrace being a relationship person now, that I can be vulnerable, and that's my strength. Like that being able to be myself now. I hated, everything about me when I was little, and it took me a lot of work to learn to love myself and to be okay with being vulnerable and to be okay with crying all the time. And I hated doing that, but now I've gone so much more further in life. I worked hard to get to a certain place in my life being an action person, but I was never happy, for one, and I was always fighting. And when I finally was able to be myself and be emotional and be vulnerable and be myself and cry at meeting room tables, and I got further in life and I became more successful. Not only that, but I was happy. I was happy because I could be myself and I didn't have to be fake anymore.
Mm-hmm. Wow. It's interesting that you said, you're talking about at the tables, at the decision-making table, who's at the table. And I remember having a conversation with a male friend probably 10 years ago, and we were explaining, I was saying we need more women leadership in the world, globally. And I gave all these examples, and I'm like, where is there that balance in that leadership? And look what's happening. And he said, well, we can't have women at the decision making tables. And he actually used an example of the Hunger Games. He said there's one point when they're making tough decisions, they're about to go into battle, and then she, breaks into tears. He's like, that's a perfect example of why women or, emotional people, relationship people shouldn't be at those tables. And I was like, that's exactly why they need to be at those tables. If you're making decisions that involve people's lives, that involve, the sacred, that involve these really important things, you need the people who are able to feel what that could be like and haven't shut themselves off. So can you tell me a little bit about can you share a little more about what that's been like to come into yourself and notice that your vulnerability is a strength and it does help you get to where you want to be and need to be?
Yeah, I think when I was being tough and when I was being businesslike and when I was supporting patriarchy and the old boys club without knowing it, I was silent. I was quiet. I just did what I was told, and I pushed things forward, and I just did the work, and then I get a pat on the back. And I feel like it's kind of like when I was when I was the only Indian in the room, and I was the same way. I was quiet, I was passive, I just did the work, I put my head down, and I continually was invited to these tables, and I felt good about that. But then I started realizing I was only being invited because I was a good Indian, and I did what I was told. And I started to feel the same way as a woman at the table with our own leadership, that as long as I was quiet, as long as I did the work, as long as I produced in based on their rules, that I was a good woman, that I was contributing. And I didn't make change that way. I just contributed to the system that is broken and doesn't work. And the moment I started using my voice and crying and speaking up, I was able to do some work that created change, or that supported change, or that introduced policy, or that started normalizing conversations. When I became the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs Women's Representative, when I would come to the table to do my report, the chiefs would be on their phone, and they would start side talking, or especially when I started talking about sexual harassment and assault and rape, and how I was sexually assaulted by a prominent Indigenous leader, and how hundreds of women reached out to me and said they experienced the same thing from chiefs. When I sat at a table of 60 chiefs and I shared these stories, they didn't want to listen. And people would make, why are we talking? This is a political table. Why is she talking about this here? And I kept bringing it up. Every quarterly report that I did, I brought it up. We need to have policy. We need to address this. The ones who see this happening, you need to speak up. We need to say something. We need, we can't keep doing this to our young women who come in and then they just take it because that's the way it is. And we wonder why our women are quiet. They're taking, these men are taking the power from the women so that they feel like they don't have a voice. And if that wasn't happening, the women that would be able to stand up and the leadership roles that they could take. So I continued to share, and by probably about a year and a half into my term, they started listening, and they started meeting they would make eye contact with me, and they were paying attention, and they were making comments back, or they would say thank you. And they started realizing the impact that their behaviors made. And so proud of our leadership in British Columbia, because I've had these same talks with leadership across the country. And some other provinces where I've spoken at, they are so disrespectful. They won't even have it. They'll leave the room, or they'll tell you to be quiet, or that doesn't belong here. But I really, we don't have perfect leadership, of course, but I still have so much faith that things will continue to get better because we have these conversations. We had a panel to talk about this at our provincial meeting between the province with the different ministers and the BC leadership, and this was a topic at this political gathering, and it was the first time anything like this had been discussed. And that was what we said: we need to continue having these conversations, not just because it's Me Too, not just because it's something that we're talking about. We have to continue to talk about this, to normalize it, to understand that this impacts the way we make decisions and the way we do things. And everybody's a part of it. And until we start addressing those things, then, how are we supposed to address these bigger issues? Because, we need to have leadership with integrity. We need to have leadership that are going to respect women. My husband said something the other day when I said, I really made a push for our organizations to have alcohol-free galas and alcohol-free receptions, because a majority of the complaints come from women from those gatherings. And I'm really pushed hard to say alcohol has no place at these things. Not only that, but our medicines are there. You know, our elders are there, our youth are there. This alcohol has no place there. If people want to drink and have fun on their own time and terms, that's fine. But when we're meeting for these important things, we don't need people showing up half shot the next day to vote on something. You know, we don't need people not showing up because they were sexually assaulted the night before. And, you know, I pushed for that really hard. The AFN did it 1 year where they decided not to have alcohol at their Christmas gala, but it still continues on. And it's something that I feel that we really need to address, because, you know, we continue to have young women and youth that are assaulted at these things. So, you know, by talking about that and by saying this is why, and this is why it's important, you know, what my husband had said, what if somebody brought in a camera to one of these galas? You know, would we be proud of, you know, would our leadership be proud of how they conducted themselves? You know, would they be willing to show up the next day and stand there with their head up, you know, to speak out when a resolution hits the floor on MMIWG?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I'm constantly, you know, challenging our leadership to do better, be better, you know, and the only way you can do that is look at yourself. And the only way you can do that is develop those relationships and take the time, because if we just focus on the action, we're leaving the majority of our people behind.
Mm. I'm really interested in the conversations around healing and around, I mean, that's a word that's used often. You know, you were talking about, I hope one day I can be healed. And we use this like we know what that even means in a way, but to be well, you know, and sometimes within, like you said, political rooms or political conversations, whatever that means, as if they're disconnected in one way or another, anyways. But that conversation, like you said, even around the healing that needs to happen, because you know we can talk big talk, like I'm a journalist, I know what it's like to put something out there when you're not well, you know, and for us to be able to do well and to tell the truth and make these kinds of changes that so many people want, we need to be in line with ourselves and in an authentic place to be able to bring that to light. Do you think there's a lot of, and I mean, I know addictions complicates things and is completely interwoven into this, but there seems to be a lot of lying to ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of lying to ourselves. Like, what did it take for you to be honest with yourself? And then it seems like you just hit the ground running with that. You didn't stop. You
Mm-hmm.
haven't stopped telling the truth, and that's powerful. A woman who tells the truth is very powerful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I don't even, I, it was when I got my voice back and I decided to start speaking out, when I decided to address my sexual assault. When I was 35 or 36, I was at a really big gathering, a political gathering. And one of our leaders approached me and placed his hand on my butt, on my hip, on my butt. And the first time I let it go because I thought it was a mistake. It was just a mistake that had happened. And then later on, we ended up in the same elevator, and a staff person was on the elevator, and this staff person got off the elevator, and he came across the elevator and grabbed me into an embrace that was totally inappropriate and made a really ugly noise in my ear, and I pushed him away. And then I got nervous and I got embarrassed for him. And
Yeah.
I just started chattering, like, oh, so where are you going? What are you doing? How was the day? And it was just awkward. And we both bolted off the elevator. And it stayed with me. And when I told my friend at dinner that night, he said, that's sexual assault. That's sexual harassment. And I said, no, that's not it. And I remember waking up and having these feelings of dread and depression and fear. And I started searching on the internet what sexual harassment meant. I was 36 and I had been sober for 6 years and I didn't know what sexual harassment was. I didn't know what consent was. And to me, it kept coming up rape, violent rape. And so then I started pushing it away like, oh, it's not, why is this happening to me? And it kept getting worse and worse until the point I couldn't think, I couldn't concentrate. I felt like drinking again. I felt like hurting myself. I felt like I was going crazy. And I shared this at a meeting, and a woman came up and told me, I want to share my story with you. And she told me about her experience being sexually assaulted and her childhood experience and the power she received from speaking out and bringing this person to court. And she said, what I later learned was that I had post-traumatic stress or complex stress disorder. And so I reached out to a trauma therapist and I learned what trauma was, and I learned what PTSD meant, and I learned that everything my brain was doing was normal and that I could work through it. And that it was that hope again, like, okay, I'm not going crazy. Okay, this is what happened to me. And then I decided to write him a letter. And there were a couple of leaders that really stood out to support me. Grand Chief Stuart Phillip has been my mentor. He's been like my dad to me. He's supported me through everything. And him and his wife, I remember his wife told me when I was starting to get really scared because I decided I wanted to have a face-to-face mediation with this person. And she said, if you do this, she said, no one will ever touch you again. And as soon as she said that, I just burst out crying. And I kept thinking about things, and I went through so much stuff. I was angry at the women because he'd done this his whole career and everybody knew about him. And I was like, well, I don't go to the after parties. I don't go to receptions. I'm not looking for attention. People leave me alone. Like, I was one of those victim blamers. Well, if they didn't go to that party and if they weren't wearing that dress and if they weren't acting that way, like, that's how I thought. And so, of course, when that happened, I was like, oh, I shouldn't have worn that dress, or, oh, I shouldn't have been bent over. My mom told me as a little girl, don't bend over in front of men. And so, I was like going through all of this stuff, mad at the women because why didn't you say something? Because now I have to deal with this. Mad at the men who should have protected me, and just mad at everybody. And then I was like, man, I'm 36 years old. Grand Chief Stuart Phillip is my mentor. I have friends in really high places. I have done 7 years of intense healing, and I felt like committing suicide. I felt like drinking again. I have all of these tools, and I just about hit the ground and lost it. So if that's happening to me at my age and my experience, what are those 20-year-old women going through? And if I walk away from this and don't say anything, then I'm going to be one of those women that those 20-year-old women are going to blame. And I can't live with myself. And if I don't do this, I can never do the work I do ever again. I can't talk about healing. I can't talk about accountability. I can't talk about honesty. I can't talk about these things if I'm not going to do this. And so I had a one-on-one mediation with him. And I told him everything that he had done to me and how it made me feel. And I told him about my childhood. And I said, this is how it affected me. And I just about lost my life because of this. And we made a commitment to each other to continue to heal and be accountable. And at the time, I felt he was very committed to that healing process. But I think as the time has passed, he has convinced himself that I overreacted. And so, but that's not for me to hold on to anymore, because when I left that room, I had my power back. When I left my room, I was like, that's the scariest thing I've ever done in my life.
Wow.
And I feel good, and I feel my power, and I feel my courage. And if I can do that, I can do anything. And I spoke out against, a white man working in our community who I believed was racist. And I got beat up by my community for speaking out against this person. And I didn't care because I knew what he was doing and how he was doing. Even if he didn't realize he was doing it, I needed him to know that this wasn't right. And since then, I've done my best to speak out, because I know that's the only way we can make change. We can't change or heal what we don't acknowledge. And if we're not speaking it, putting it into words, bringing it to light, we can't change it, we can't heal it, no matter how uncomfortable it is. And, you know, when I have to make a decision on what to do, Stuart and Joan always tell me the answer is simple. It might be hard, but the answer always is do the right thing. And so, you know, that's what I continually try to do in my life, even when it sucks. A lot of times it sucks, but the space you get to after you do that work, if you do it from your heart, that's the growth, that's the strength. And the more you do it, the more you claim your power, the easier it gets.
We only have about 5 minutes left. Could you read another part?
My teacher shared with me that we are born with something other living beings are not: a mind capable of memory and intelligence to create and learn language to pass on our knowledge. The animals are our family, they are our parents, and if we respect them, we do not have to be afraid of them. When we go on the land, we introduce ourselves with our Nsilkchin name so the land will know who we are. My family was great at teaching us about fly in all parts of our life. They raised us to respect fly. Fly was small and annoying, but just as important as everyone else. When people came into our lives who are fly, we have to listen to them because they are here to teach us a lesson. My family taught me that when people make fun of me or call me names, I'm not to take it inside of me or hold on to it. My mom would tell me that I should probably feel sorry for them and that they were most likely hurting, and that was why they were being mean. I was always taught to think of why people behaved a certain way instead of taking it personally. When I was little, I was told certain stories for certain teachings. As I got older, I learned more complex teachings with more words and more ways of seeing and knowing things. As an adult, I began to understand that each being has purpose, even a small and seemingly insignificant pest. I learned that fly song was just as powerful as the chief song. And when we take the time to hear everyone's song, we are so powerful we can bring back life. Sometimes we don't think alike. We might not even like each other or agree, but it is important to listen to all views and perspectives to develop a full picture so we can make good decisions for our people. We all have powerful prayers. We can make things happen, especially if we do them together. Great things happen if we know how to listen and learn from all peoples, teachings, beliefs, and religions. Our family was raised to be open to everyone and respect how different we are. They centered most of our learning around listening and paying attention to the world. My mom always said, don't just think about yourself when you talk to people. It took me a really long time to figure out what she meant.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today and agreeing to speak with someone that you don't know. You were highly recommended from Isla Brown, and I trust she's a brilliant person, so I trust that. Thank you so much for your time. I really look forward to reading this book. I really look forward to reading. So, and thank you for all of your work, all that it takes to do what you do. You're recognized all the way here in Brazil.
Thank you.
So we'll be sure to spread the word.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me, and this was amazing. And yeah, I just thank you for those questions and for asking me to read pieces of this book, because I haven't done that yet.
Thank you for doing that today. I'll be sure to keep you posted. We're going to share the video and, you know, a bit more of your story and try and do that in the best way possible. So we'll be in touch.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care, Elaine.
Bye.